Did you know that Genesis does what Nintendo don't? It's true, or at least for about 22 years, that was the case. Here's something crazy that might blow your mind that a lot of people don't realize. Long before the Nintendo Switch, which was 2017,
Yes.
Sega did that very same thing in 1995 with the Sega Genesis, or Mega Drive, depending on where you're from. Most people don't realize this.
No.
And that little device was called
The Sega Nomad.
the Sega Nomad. Okay, so let's, in case you don't know, let's run down the specs of the Sega Nomad real quick. So the Sega Nomad was released in 1995,
Yep.
and this was the Genesis. You can even see right here on the front, it says the Genesis
Nomad.
And what this thing did was it took the entire Genesis system, packaged it up into this nice, tight, tiny little box, which I want to say 95. By this time, I think we had the CDX already.
Yeah, it was around that time.
And the CDX was not much bigger than this. No. So it wasn't hard for them to pack the console into a little thing like this. But what they did is they added a screen. They added a screen and they added buttons. Yeah. So we actually had a very ergonomic, I might say, handheld Sega Genesis. Right here at the top, it actually took your Sega Genesis or Mega Drive cartridges. Boop. Just like that. This is what made the thing special. And this is why I say, time and time again, Sega was ahead of the curve. Unfortunately, in some places, they were too ahead of the curve and missed the turnoff, and that's why we don't have Sega consoles anymore. But this thing had video
output. Yeah.
Same video output that the Sega Genesis did.
Exactly.
It was the same cable.
Same thing.
Yeah, you plug that thing in there, plug it into your TV, voila, it plays, and you have a 6-button controller, not the original 3-button controller, a 6-button controller right here. Most people are going, that's great, but what happens when you want to do like, Gunstar Heroes or some other 2-player game? We have a second player controller port directly on the bottom of this device. So you could sit here with this, and then I could plug a controller into this, and we can play together while this is linked to the TV. So let me ask you, now that I've explained it, does that sound familiar at all? Let's fast forward to like 2017.
Yeah, the Nintendo Switch doing the same thing. 22 years later.
22 years later. Now, I'm not saying that Nintendo didn't perfect it, because I'm going to tell you right now, the Switch, probably in 20 years, we're going to be talking about the Nintendo Switch as one of the best consoles, not only that Nintendo has put out, but in my humble opinion, one of the best consoles ever. The library is fantastic. It has one of the best Marios. It has 2 of the best Zeldas. It's a fantastic console.
Sure is.
So I'm not throwing any shade, as the kids would say, in the direction of Nintendo. I'm merely pointing out that Sega is truly ahead of its curve.
Oh yeah, 22 years ahead of the curve.
22 years! Can you believe that? That's wild. Think of how mind blown so many people were in 2017 when Nintendo shows this commercial, right? When they first debut that Switch. And it shows, boom, you slam it onto a dock, you can play it on your TV, boom, boom, boom. And then when you want to go to your friend's house or you're going on vacation or whatever, you take that thing off the dock and then it's seamless. You can just play it, whatever. This does that.
Exactly.
22 years before Nintendo was doing it. Compatible with the entire Genesis library too. If somebody says that Sega wasn't ahead of the time, they certainly were. They had their problems, but they were ahead of the time. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about maybe some of the downsides to the Sega Nomad. In the last video that you and I did, you showed us all the downsides to Sega's first handheld, which was the Sega Game Gear. And you fixed them all. Wonderful brand new display, which is beautiful, crisp looking. Replaced a lot of the capacitors in there. We even gave it a nice new shell, and most importantly, we gave it some rechargeable batteries. Let's talk about the problems with the Nomad.
Very similar. Very similar. Chewed through batteries like nothing. I mean, if you were lucky to get 2 to 3 hours of gameplay on a Nomad.
And there's a reason, just real quick, let's talk about why Nintendo chose to A, not backlight the Game Boy, and B, not make it color.
It's a good point. So when they originally were making the Game Boy, they did have a prototype with color screen.
Yep.
The thing is, it took more batteries.
Yeah, it chewed through them.
And cost was higher. And they wanted people to be able to afford these, you know? And so that's why they went with the black and white screen, basically, and, you know, the 4 battery concept that they had. But we could have gotten, you know, at the start with the Game Boy, one with color. And
one that was backlit.
Yep.
But Nintendo chose, and smart choice on Nintendo's part. Sega came in and they were like, we don't care, man. We're going to show you what you can really do by,
putting 12 batteries,
spending thousands of dollars on batteries. This is my childhood Nomad. I'm one of the few people that knew what a Nomad was back in the day. And I had one. I loved it. But I did play this thing plugged in most of the time. Because it is a Sega Genesis, you can just plug it in with your Genesis 2 cable and obviously your AV outs. The other really big issue, well, in fairness, back in 1995, I think it probably looked pretty good, but the other issue was the screen.
Yeah,
right.
Very similar screen to the Game Gear. You know, had the just contrast to see the screen well, and a lot of these days, you know, with age, the screens are going bad.
Yeah.
And well, like the Game Gear as well, capacitors go bad. So it kind of suffers from a lot of the things that the Game Gear did with age.
We put this side by side with the brand new one, and it's pretty mind-blowing. So in a couple of minutes, we're gonna pull out what Dr. Mod has done to the Nomad, and we're gonna run them side by side so you can see, same game, Lion King, and we're gonna see exactly the difference between the two, because it was shocking to me just how different it was.
It looks amazing. And the other thing, you know, what made the Nomad a little bit different is, if you look at the back of it, there aren't any, you know, where's the battery slot? Well, actually, it had a big, like, compartment of batteries that would clip to the back and make contact with these 2 pins here.
6 AA's, just like the...
And you'd have to clip that into the back of it to use it for battery power. So that made it a little bit different than the Game Gear. The Nomad really comes from, well, it's actually a continuation of something else that we never got in the States.
Yeah. Let's talk about where this thing came from at first. You're probably seeing this thing right here and wondering, what the hell is that?
What the hell
Why
is
do
that?
you have a Nomad sitting there without a screen? Let's explain the Sega Mega Jet to people who don't know. What's the Mega Jet?
Well, that's what the Nomad is, minus the screen. They had these in Japan, and they had them on, well, you see the word jet, they were on airplanes. And
I was going to say, why was this created?
Yeah, it was to allow kids to have entertainment, or adults to have entertainment in the airplane. It had the output to TV that you would hook up to a small screen. Had the extra controller port too as well. And you could put a cartridge in there and play on the airplane. And so the airlines mainly had these and allowed people to play while they were in flight.
You'd rent it on the airlines, plug it into the back of the seat, pow. The interesting thing about the Mega Jet is we didn't get it here in the States.
No.
And that's why it's called the Mega Jet and not like the Super Genesis or the Jet Genesis or the Genesis Jet or something like that. I'd have to look and see what year this was, but I would imagine it's probably the year before this, maybe 93, 94. They introduced this. They already pretty much had the design here.
Yeah.
Right? All they had to do was add the screen to it.
Exactly.
Sega didn't really do a lot of advertising and marketing for this thing. In fairness, you didn't see it advertised or marketed a lot. Had this thing had launched as part of the initial console launch. Just imagine, here's the Sega Genesis. It's portable. You could plug it in, you could take it on the road. Obviously the technology wasn't there in 1988, 89 when we got the Genesis. I will give it to Nintendo, they launched it right, you know, there was right from the start. But they did come along first with this concept.
Yeah.
Just saying. So, what have you done with this new upgraded Genesis? We talked about the batteries.
Yep.
Talked about the screen.
Yep.
Do they make shells like they do for these other ones? Or?
This was a little different than getting the Game Gear shell. I actually had to go with a company that had the 3D printed it for me, resin printed it for me, and so I had it specially made for the one we're about to show. And so it's a little different. The quality of plastic's a little bit different. It's not casted, but it looks great, as you're going to see.
I think we need to just pull it out so
let's
everybody
get it out
can see
there.
this thing. Are you guys ready for this? This thing really blew my mind. I am so in love with this thing. This is the new 2025, still feels weird saying that year, 2025 edition, the Sega Nomad. The Dr. Mod Special Sega Nomad. Out with the old, in with the new. Let's talk about what you've done, starting with the battery.
This is from a company called Laser Bear Industries, and they make this 3D printed battery holder that clips to the back of your Sega Nomad. And it allows you to put lithium batteries into this thing, which we know store more charge.
Yeah, let's... Oh, I can just open it right now.
Yeah, just slide her in. So
Look
you
at
can
that.
see right there.
2 lithium batteries.
Yep. You're going to get, instead of 2 to 3 hours of gameplay, you're going to get 6 hours plus with this thing. And then look at that.
Yeah.
Look at the top of that. What do you
We
notice?
got USB-C.
Yep.
And the original port.
Exactly.
Brand new, rechargeable battery pack. Look at that.
Yep.
Bam! I gotta ask, we talked about capacitors on this thing. Are capacitors as much of an issue on the Nomad?
Yes, they are at an age where they start to go bad.
Okay.
And it's a good idea to refresh them as well. You know, we've got one of those kits that had all the capacitors for it. Did that as well with this one. Just to make sure we get another 20 to 30 years out of this.
Yeah.
At least.
This is the shell that you had resin printed?
Yeah, I had to go with a company called PCBWay, and they had the option of getting this printed in different colors. I chose clear because I think it's just really neat to see the inside of it.
It's such an awesome, cool 90s
It looks
throwback.
great. Yeah,
It really is.
So I got it done in clear, and then I added my own logos to it. Put the Sega logo on
Look
there.
at
Nomad.
that.
I chose a brushed aluminum style. Thought that would be nice with it, and so I
And
did
you
that
printed
myself.
these?
I used my Cricut vinyl cutter to make those.
Wow, look at
And,
that. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Is this new buttons and new D-pads, or is this
No,
the OG?
no, I took those and polished them,
Awesome.
cleaned them up.
That's very important,
Yeah.
in my opinion, to have that same feel. This is original hardware. Well, let's go over that real quick, actually, because in the last video, if you didn't watch on the Game Gear, you can watch it right here. We showed the boards, because you had the boards out on the table, and that screen cracked up the middle.
Oh yeah, it was completely cracked.
And the boards they'd seen better days.
Yeah,
So you gave them a good cleanup.
sure did.
Give us a little rundown of what this screen is.
So I got it on AliExpress. It's the high-speed I do screen for the Nomad. It actually wasn't too bad to hook up. It had a few wires. Take out the original screen and ribbon cable from that, and you wire several points of the board to the board of the screen. And I gotta say, the color on this is amazing. The brightness,
It is
everything.
completely mind-blowing. What does the contrast wheel do anything now?
It does. It adjusts the brightness now instead of the contrast. So you can actually adjust your brightness there. And if you hit a button combination, hitting start and the A and B button, you can actually bring up a menu and change the screen size, the pixel effect, and even the brightness from there.
So the thing that I noticed when just from booting this up and having just played that one, like the refresh rate is like drastically different. When you look at the old Nomad and you play games like Lion King on the original Nomad, there is a noticeable difference in the actual refresh of the screen. It's almost blurry.
You know, this is 30 years later. Technology's changed a lot.
Yeah.
Much smaller screen, much thinner screen, and less power usage.
Yeah, let's look at these things side by side and just take a look at it. I mean, that is a noticeable difference.
Oh, yeah.
Just not only in refresh rate and overall brightness, but the color of it. And again, we're using the original buttons and the original board and everything, so everything feels just as snappy as you remember from the Sega Genesis. This was one of the machines that early on when we first met and we started talking about things, I was like, man, you know, it'd be really great as a Nomad. Nomad has always been one of my favorite Sega devices. I think not just because it's, you know, it's a little underrated, but the Genesis had such a fantastic library, and it was so snappy. Sonic brought to consoles something that, you know, I mean, they weren't really lying when they said, you know, the Genesis does what Nintendo don't. And part of their marketing was showing the difference between Sonic and Mario. Yeah. Genesis fan or Super Nintendo fan, you can't deny that there was a pretty noticeable difference.
Oh, yeah.
Original speaker still?
Original speaker still.
Okay.
And everything else about it's original. That's the original back part of the
Yeah, we got
shell.
the original back of the shell there. And the one thing we should point out, that I like to point out in all of these episodes, this was a salvage.
It was.
If you don't know this, the Sega Nomad, probably on the upper echelon of expensive Sega consoles. Saturn's getting up there a little bit.
It is.
Definitely the CDX. If you want a working one, you're gonna pay somewhere between $800 to $1,000 for a working Sega Nomad. Dr. Mod actually got this exact one broken.
broken. Yep.
What was broken about it?
The screen.
Screen was completely cracked.
Just completely cracked. And you know what? It still was pricey to get it.
What did you end up paying for the broken Nomad?
So just for the broken one, it was $200.
$200, which actually is a pretty good price for a Nomad, especially what you've done to it. Let's break this down. The screen cost?
Screen was $77.
What did the case cost?
Same price basically for the case.
That's not bad. And then the only other thing that you really did to it is the battery.
The battery. Yeah, so the shell itself from Laser Bear Industries is $40.
Okay.
The batteries actually ended up being more expensive. They were $60.
$60 for the both of them.
Yeah, because we wanted something that's going to run this thing for hours.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get the highest power batteries we could get for this. So yeah, that ended up being more than the actual, holder for them.
It's even at your cost with the build, it's still a fairly expensive build.
It is.
Somewhere around. The Sega Nomad is definitely a collector's console.
It is.
I would say.
It is.
Yeah. Or somebody who already owns one, like me. I've had one since I was a kid. So let's just touch real quick on one other thing that we sort of touched on at the end of the last video, and that would be this guy here.
Oh yeah. So this is the Mega SD, and it's a multi-cart. And what's great about this one is that it allows you to play Master System, Sega CD, and Genesis. And if you have the 32X adapter on your Genesis, for instance, you could do 32X games on it as well. This cartridge is really nice. It's got a great menu. It's got little video previews on this little CRT TV on the bottom of the screen.
So with this upgrade like this and the Mega SD cartridge, you've got your Sega Master System games, the whole library.
Yep.
You've got backups of your Sega Genesis or Mega Drive games, the whole library. And you got Sega CD games.
Exactly.
So you could play Night Trap in this bad boy.
You could.
Sewer Shark
Yes.
on this bad boy.
You could.
Yeah. I think that is a really, really neat addition. Or, if you have a bunch of, Sega Genesis carts, that totally works fine. That's actually, if I have the cartridge, truth be told, this is probably how I'm gonna play. So yeah, I mean, there you go. That kind of covers the whole gambit. So we got the Game Gear.
Yep.
That you've done a complete refresh on. Now we have the Sega Nomad. Really, the only two consoles, handheld consoles, that Sega ever made. Short lifespan, but two really impressive handhelds.
Absolutely.
I really like them. And a lot of people, like I said, a lot of people didn't even know that the Sega Nomad existed.
Exactly.
So there you have it. There is another what's old is now new again from Dr. Mod. This one may be a little more of a collector's console than you would say for the Sega Game Gear, because the Sega Game Gear, you can still find those for pretty inexpensive.
Exactly.
The Nomad is a little bit harder to come across.
It is.
If the Game Gear does interest you though, and you want to see exactly what Dr. Mod has done to it, you should check that video out right here. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that little bell notification icon right here so you don't miss videos like this in the future, because Dr. Mod's labs are so much fun to do.
Oh, they're fun. Love it.
So, I don't know. What are we gonna do now?
The same thing we do every night, Chris.
Try and take over the world. Enjoy the journey.